Greetings. Alfsteiner and I are pleased to introduce our paper in the Academy of Management Review on generating theory by abduction. You know, theory building involves at least three related activities. First, we need to come up with an idea, a hunch, a creative germ. That is conceiving a theory by abduction. Then that half-backed idea or hunch needs to be constructed into a theory by logical deductive theorizing, which then needs to be justified as a theory by argumentation and by empirical induction. These three methods of reasoning, abduction, deduction, and induction, are highly interrelated, but we should clarify their differences. Deduction, go ahead. Deduction means you're moving from general principles to specific instances. It's a syllogistic reasoning where if the major and the minor premises are both true, the conclusion must be true. It's, in other words, all men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. It is this logical validity that is the criterion for judging a deductive theory. Induction moves in the opposite direction. It begins with moving from specific instances observed in the world to general aggregate principles. It involves statistical, quantitative, or qualitative analysis of data to find a probabilistic function of relationships between variables, percentages, and so forth. Here it is empirical truth that is the criterion. Abduction, on the other hand, is quite different. It moves from an unexplained anomaly, a surprise, toward a plausible explanation. It's a process of generating and creating and evaluating explanations that may render the surprise understandable, where plausibility is the criterion. For example, suppose I have 10 swans in a lake, and we find that one of those swans is black. Now, we've noticed an anomaly, and we wonder and analyze that black swan, and we have to verify that the anomaly in fact exists. Having found it, now I can even distinguish by induction. I would probably conclude that if this set of 10 swans is representative of the population, 90% of swans are white, 10% are black. If, on the other hand, I was to examine deductively my theory, I would have to reject my theory that all swans are white because I find one is black. Abductively, I'd move to step 3 and create hunches that address the anomaly. A creative germ, a possibility, a half-baked idea. For example, that black swan perhaps is a result of a mutation. It's a genetic problem. Or maybe it's a migratory problem. I know there's some swans, black swans, that live in Australia, but they're not likely to migrate all the way to North America, but it's a possibility. A third hunch is that that swan perhaps has gotten itself into that oil slick, that polluted water on the side of the lake that the others have not gotten into. So here's a problem of pollution. Now I've got 3 hunches, and I can evaluate them by selecting and refining the best of those hunches, obviously with the engagement of other colleagues and collaborators. More about this is by Alf. What do you see?
Yeah, the key word to discovery has often been said to be eureka, as in the case of Archimedes. But more often, it is that's funny. For example, in what led to the discovery of penicillin, Alexander Fleming reported in 1928 that he was cleaning some petri dishes that was left in a sink. And one of them made him stop and say, "That's funny." So mold was growing in one of the dishes, which is not too unusual. But all around the mold, the staph bacteria had been killed, which was very unusual. Similarly, in 1992, scientists at Pfizer were testing a pill to fight angina. And unfortunately for the afflicted, it had very little success against the disease. But in spite of the medicine not working, the men that were taking part of the study refused to give it up. That's funny. Why would you want to keep a medicine that doesn't work? And this led to the discovery of Viagra. Our friend and colleague at Harvard, Amy Edmondson, was early in her career studying medical errors in hospitals. And she discovered that high-performance teams make more mistakes than low-performance teams. Wait, what? That's funny. Do high-performance team really make more mistakes than low-performance team? Yes. What explains this anomaly? Well, she reasoned that the good teams do not make more mistakes, they report more mistakes, which isn't quite the same thing. And so her hunch was that one potential mechanism that would explain this anomaly is a belief that making a mistake will not be held against you. Aha. And as many of you know, this led to the discovery of psychological safety, which is a very powerful construct. And so what we propose is a four-step model of abductive reasoning that takes place at the individual and collective level. And in step one, you observe the anomaly. And here, what you try to avoid is the tendency that we humans have of adapting our experience to fit into, as if they already fit into existing theories, but rather we should adapt our theories to fit our experiences. That is, we need to cherish our anomalies because they are the foundation for theorizing. And in step two, which we've seen both with the swans and with Amy and the medical errors, you confirm the anomaly. Am I really seeing this? And here you do that in order to avoid type 3 errors. And in step three, you generate hunches. And you generate many hunches as you can in order to avoid jumping to solutions. And you have people with diverse experiences with you generating hunches in order to decorrelate the error terms of the hunches you generate. And then in step four, you evaluate the hunches. And here plausibility becomes a substitute for validity. And what we call hunches and conjectures, Nobel laureate Rita Levi-Montalcini calls intuition. And she says that I don't believe there would be any science at all without intuition. And so this is a process of generating and evaluating ideas. When you generate ideas, the greater the number of different hunches you develop, the better off you are. And the more ideas come from the same category, the fewer breakthroughs you'll experience because they're all similar. When you evaluate hunches, the greater the number of different criteria that you use consistently across the different hunches, the better off you are. And for example, if you evaluate hunch number one on how interesting it is, and hunch number two on how useful it is, and hunch number three on how practical it is, then you're going to have difficulty comparing them. So you use a diverse set of criteria consistently across all hunches to evaluate them. And so, as I mentioned initially, this is an individual and collective level process. And so at the individual process, it is an evolutionary process of variation, selection, and retention, where you generate as many diverse hunches as you possibly can, and you evaluate them with a fairly limited set of criteria. And this is often limited to partial insights. And so at the collective level, the process fundamentally changes. It's no longer an evolutionary process of variation, selection, and retention. Instead, it becomes a dialectical process of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. And here, your partial insights and hunches are complemented by others and fused into a collective idea. And evaluation and criticism make people go deeper, and it shapes creativity among a trusted set of collaborators. And so we drew on Vergante's inside-out process of creating meaning with expanding groups. And so he applied this process in an innovation context, You can apply it to theory building as well. As in the case with Andy and myself, we had both individually been thinking about abduction for many years, and we started having conversations about it, and then we started writing about it. And at some point, we got to the point where we need some other feedback from other people on our thinking here, and so we sent it to our radical circle, which are the people we thank in our footnote on page 1, and went several rounds, clashing and fusing with them. And then eventually we sent it to a journal, and our interpreters became the Academy Management Review editorial team with their associate editor and 3 reviewers. And we went to, rounds with them. They were questioning our work. And then finally, it's ready to be launched upon an unsuspecting audience. And the reason we do this is that problems arise when we do our thinking in alone. For example, there's a well-documented phenomenon of confirmation bias, which leads us to preferentially attend to information that confirms beliefs we already hold. And this bias is accentuated when we reason in solitude, because our reasoning is not necessarily aimed at arriving at objective truth. It's more designed for defending our own arguments and scrutinizing and critiquing the arguments of others. And this is why it's absolutely key to work with a trusted partner.
A very nice example of the characteristics of this collective abductive process is provided by Tversky and Kahneman. In the book, The Undoing Project, A Friendship That Changed Our Minds by Michael Lewis, writes that Daniel Kahneman, on the collaboration with Amos Tversky, said this: when one of us would say something that was off the wall, the other would search for virtue in it. We would finish each other's sentences, and frequently did, but we also kept surprising each other. It still gives me goosebumps. Richard Nisbett, the Michigan psychologist, put it this way: they wrote together, sitting right next to each other at the typewriter. The way Danny put it was, we were sharing a mind, could no longer identify whose idea was whose. They both felt and found it pointless to allocate credit, as their thoughts felt like some alchemical byproduct of their interaction. Now, this kind of interaction, of course, is not the same in every time. In fact, it varies a great deal from low to medium to high levels of probable novelty. For example, in each of the steps, we can think about low levels of disciplined imagination. Like when you observe anomaly, in fact, you view it as fitting into your existing frame. Whereas in medium levels of abduction, you're going to view the anomaly as a surprise, not fitting into your existing frame. But in a high level of abduction, you're going to recognize and obtain the collective views and divergent views of others about the anomaly. In step 2, you're not going to just assume the anomaly exists without verifying and without evidence. Instead, at a medium level, you're going to ground the anomaly with an example up close and with evidence of its pervasiveness in context from afar. And at a high level of novelty, likely novelty, collective diagnosis of what is known and not known of the anomaly is going to expand and increase novelty. In terms of step 3, generating hunches. Don't just generate a single one immediate hunch. At a moderate level, generate many diverse hunches. At a high level of novelty, involve others to use independent categories of hunches. Finally, in step 4, selecting the first hunch that comes to mind is probably going to lead to a low level of novelty. Better is to use many different evaluation criteria, and even better is to involve others with diverse selection criteria. So what we have then is a recognition that there are different levels of novelty that emerge depending upon how abductive reasoning is performed. We make from that these following prescriptions. Number one, observe the anomaly. Avoid the tendency to adopt our experiences to fit our theories, as opposed to adopting our theories to fit the experiences. Second, confirm the anomaly. Frivolous cases are thrown out in a court of law, so also should they be in the case of science. Grounding the anomaly up close and from afar is critical to avoid type 3 errors. Step 3 is to generate hunches. Seek many alternative hunches. Avoid jumping to solution. Seek divergent hunches with others. And step 4, evaluating hunches. Selecting plausible hunches and converging on the selection criteria with others. From that, we can move on to deductive theory construction and inductive theory testing, and be to attended to develop the chosen hunches. Well, thanks very much for listening. We hope this helps you enjoy and think through our paper.